Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Grayzone. Sorry for being a little late there. We did have some technical issues, and I wanted to make sure, since we have so much to cover, that I got all the elements in order today. We're also live now on Rockfin and on Twitter X, where Kit Clarenberg is dead. He's been killed by the free speech regime of Elon Musk. He was digitally assassinated. Disturbing if you consider what Elon is trying to do with X to make it the everything app, which means you will be removed from life. It's almost like the nightmare of social credit, the fourth industrial revolution's most dystopian version come to life, courtesy of a guy who claims to be against it all, or at least caters to the audience that supposedly hates Davos. So anyway, me and Aaron are here, and we'll talk. Hopefully you have time to talk about some of Kit's latest work, but welcome, Aaron.
Well, hello, Max. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. If you're watching us live, it's great to have you here. Please like the stream, share it. Let's get everybody watching this as much as possible. We have so much to cover today.
Yeah, before we get into it, big thanks to Eric Thomas, Eric T. Red, for helping us moderate the contents and get all of your super chats on screen. Make sure to watch Sabby Sabs as well. Our friend Sabby Sabs is doing incredible work, and Eric is behind the boards there as well. And shout out to Natrix, a artist who we're featuring this week in our featured image for this stream. Her latest work is called Black and White and Red All Over. And it's a direct reference to the New York Times Hamas mass rape hoax scandal that we're going to be discussing in detail. There's so many layers to cover and unpack in that scandal. But I wanted to recognize her art. So anyway, yeah, we have a lot to cover, as you said, Aaron. I think we should start with the news out of Gaza.
Yes. Well, we all saw yesterday the flower massacre, Israel opening fire on desperate people in northern Gaza who were lining up early in the morning or late at night for flour, and then falsely claiming that the people who died were killed in a stampede, which is just such a malicious lie. This was yet another massacre carried out by Israel with the full support of the Biden administration.
So yeah, I mean, here's some footage from that was immediately taken at the flower massacre. And these massacres have actually been happening day after day in northern Gaza on Al Rashid Street, which is one of the two streets that runs from north to south that's been basically destroyed by Israel in and around Gaza City. I mean, you can hear Israeli soldiers shooting. You can see the aftermath of tank shelling. You can see tracers. We can look at a few more scenes. We can look at a few more scenes from this chaos and then try to kind of unpack what happened there. And well, look, I think you get the point. Israel is claiming that everyone died as a result of a stampede. But keep in mind, this is an open area along a major thoroughfare where people have the ability to move back. It's not a packed theater. And if you look, just go on Wikipedia and look up stampeding deaths, there's a page for it, and you'll see that almost all of them have occurred in closed spaces. For example, when there's a fire in a nightclub, those are typically where hundreds of people die. In a stadium, for example, and people can't get out. There's no exit. There, people can turn back and run away. You can clearly hear gunfire. People were found dead with tank shrapnel wounds on their body. Those aren't stampeding wounds. And on February 25th, this is well documented. It was documented by the UN. 30 people were killed in the same spot by Israel attacking them as they went to the aid truck. In fact, the State Department has acknowledged that Israel is attacking these aid convoys or people trying to get to them implicitly by stating that they are attacking or killing Hamas police. In other words, the police of the Gaza Strip, because Hamas is the ruling governing entity. And as I've said in the past live stream, Matthew Miller, State Department spokesman, actually said that Israel has the right to hold Hamas accountable by attacking those police. And so when you start attacking the police, who now have to operate undercover in order to maintain order, then you create the context for chaos, for criminal bands to come in, strip these trucks of aid, and then sell it back to the population at an inflated price, which is happening in Gaza for sure, because there's chaos, and the chaos is Israel is responsible for the chaos because it is involved in a regime change war, as we saw in Libya, as we saw in parts of Syria, as we saw in Haiti. All of these regime change operations and regime change wars have caused instability, chaos, and corruption. And then in the midst of it all, you have the Israeli military holding the population under siege and just killing them because, as Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said, they're human animals. No food, no water, no energy, no gas. You must all die. There are no uninvolved. That is the Israeli military's doctrine as it slaughters people in Gaza.
You know, in terms of the victims, this is from the AP. Gaza doctor says gunfire accounted for 80% of the wounds at his hospital from aid convoy bloodshed. So 80% of the wounds that this one doctor treated were from gunfire. So the idea that this was a stampede is just such a complete lie. And here's the scholar Amal Saad, you know, just expounding more on what you're talking about there, Max, in terms of Israel's strategy. She says, there are two reasons behind Israel's latest massacre of starving Palestinians. By deterring Palestinians from attempting to feed their families, it can raise its bargaining ceiling and use starvation and the withholding of humanitarian aid as a negotiating strategy. Second, so that it can use this narrative of alleged chaos and thuggery around food supplies to impose a day after scenario. As conceived by Israel's colonial imagination, in this final Hamas-free phase, aid delivery would be a paramount need, and Israel would be the only party able to restore law and order. This would give Israel full control, whether direct or indirect, over an unruly Gaza that requires colonial administration. So starvation as a weapon is deliberate with a long-term plan to make Gaza have to come under Israel's rule, or the rule of a regime that it installs as a collaborator.
So this is the story right now. I mean, we hear a lot about the impending plans for an Israeli assault on Rafah, the southern Gaza city, which had a population of 220,000 before the war, but now which holds 1.5 million people, all of whom had their homes destroyed, were displaced by Israeli savagery, and that will be a bloodbath for sure. But right now the bloodbath is taking place in northern Gaza, where Israel aims to create a buffer zone as part of its genocidal ethnic cleansing plans. So first, when Israel went into Gaza after October 7th, it dumped leaflets over Gaza City, everywhere from Jabalia to Gaza City, the northern part of the strip, instructing everyone to go south. But not everyone went south, because they understand that they are part of a continuous Nakba, a plan to ethnically cleanse them, push them off their land. And so they stayed. And you also want to just stay where your home is. So hundreds of thousands of people actually stayed in northern Gaza. And now Israel is punishing them for staying and attempting to push them out. That's why Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City came under attack, because it was the main institution and source of life and center of sanctuary for people who were injured, wounded, or displaced. So you remove that, then they have to go south towards Rafah. And then once, the final solution comes into play, that population in the south will be pushed into the Sinai Desert, which is why Egypt has built a giant wall. It's a separate story. We need to keep the focus on the north. That population in the north is now cut off from the center. Deir al-Balah, being the largest population area in the center of Gaza, is cut off from northern Gaza by the Israeli military. So they have nowhere to run, nowhere to escape. And now Israel's trying to cut off their food supply in order to simply starve them out. It's gotten to the point where Thomas Friedman, one of the biggest Israeli apologists at the New York Times, has said explicitly that it appears that Israel is trying to reduce the number of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip so that it can control them more easily, which sounds like the definition of genocide. So that's what we're witnessing. And the United States is doing, well, what are they doing? We're talking about aid drops now? I mean, are you kidding me?
Yeah. And the aid drops, the fact that they're talking about aid drops is an acknowledgement that Israel is blocking the aid from getting in, or else why would you have to drop the aid from the sky? So they know exactly what their partner Israel is doing, which they're allowing to do. They're not allowing actually Israel, they're supporting Israel in doing it. And now they want to throw in another performance, another PR stunt, literally a stunt, dropping aid from the sky to cover up for their complicity, just as they tried to send aids to Michigan to try to plead with their American voters that care about Palestinian lives while supplying the weapons and the diplomatic cover for the mass murder.
Let's just interrogate the insanity of this, of the U.S. sending aid drops into Gaza. Okay, the U.S. is sending the weapons that are killing, is sending Israel the weapons that are killing everyone in Gaza. It's not sending them the weapons, though. It is licensing sales of tank shells to Israel by the tens and tens of thousands every few weeks without congressional approval. It's actually violating international law for these licensing agreements to make sure that Israel can slaughter the people who are trying to get a bag of flour, along with the GBU bunker buster bombs that it's making sure Israel has replenished every few weeks as well. The U.S. has created an unprecedented air bridge for military aid to Israel to create this catastrophe. Everybody watching this knows that. So what is it going to do? It's going to drop a few packages like the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, did in a photo op, which land in the sea, and small children, like, adolescent boys, have to go swim out and get whatever they can, as if that's going to satiate the hunger of a population where 576,000 people are on the verge of famine, according to the United Nations. The United States has leverage over Israel more than it has over the United States. Like, Biden is going to war with Republican governors over immigration, and he can't control what's happening in Texas and Florida. He could control Israel much more easily. There's no country in the world where the U.S. has more leverage than over Israel. And so what the U.S. is doing by dropping a piddling amount of aid into the sea off Gaza is demonstrating how weak it is in the face of a crappy little apartheid state 5,000 miles away with a population of around 6 million people. As Bill Clinton said, who's the effing superpower here? And it's not Joe Biden. This is one of the biggest displays of American weakness, and it's totally discrediting to the rules-based order, because the U.S. knows that the U.S. is allowing this famine to continue when it is the lone vote on the UN Security Council preventing a ceasefire. It's also allowing the hostages to die. The Al-Qassam brigades just released video from the Gaza Strip of 7 older male hostages who have been killed in Israeli airstrikes. This is after the Israeli military acknowledged killing 10 other hostages. So the U.S. is allowing these hostages to be killed by blocking a ceasefire. And its solution is to airdrop aid. Do you think anyone's going to buy that? Tony Blinken referred to, this is amazing. He referred to, and this just shows you where his mind is at. When he's announcing these pathetic, hypocritical aid drops, he referred to Gaza as Ukraine. Because he can't imagine actually helping anyone in Gaza anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. At the White House, John Kirby, the White House spokesperson, was just asked about why the U.S. continues to back Israel even as people are starving in Gaza.
Is because Israel is starving people. So why are we still so supportive of Israel when it is the one that is creating the problem that the United States now has to try to ameliorate?
Israel itself has tried to help with the delivery of humanitarian assistance. As I said, they tried airdrops themselves just a week or so ago on their own accord.
What?
Many people still starving.
It's a war zone, and there's nowhere else for them to go. It's not like in some other conflicts where they can easily flee. And
so he's acknowledging the people of Gaza are trapped with nowhere to go. And then he pretends as if Israel's trying to help them, even though Israel's the one caging them, preventing them from fleeing and blocking the aid from getting in.
John Kirby, by the way, just got a promotion and he's been upgraded. His team has been expanded. He's an influential member of the Biden administration, but he's not really a member of the US government. He's sort of become Israel's English language spokesman. Because, I mean, if you look at like who you never hear from Israelis in US TV. If you did, it would just their support would dwindle even further, because you just have these genocidal zombies who are like, we must kill the human animals. They are no uninvolved in Gaza. They can go to Jordania. But then John Kirby comes in. He's like Ron Burgundy, but in a better suit. He's as slick a crisis communicator as the Biden administration can conjure up, and he's constantly making the point that Israel cares about civilian lives in Gaza, that they're trying to reduce the death toll, that they're altruistic, that they're sending aid. And I don't even hear that message from other figures in the Biden administration. Even at the State Department, there's like some smarmy level of discomfort that you can detect with them. Oh, we every life lost is one life too many, they'll say. John Kirby doesn't even pull that.
And what this comes right after Lloyd Austin just disclosed, and I've never seen a U.S. official disclose this before, unless I missed something. He just disclosed for the first time that, according to U.S. figures, Israel has killed over 25,000 women and children. He was asked by Rokana about this by Rokana.
Mr. Secretary, about how many Palestinian women and children have been killed by Israel since October 7th?
It's over 25,000.
Mr. Secretary, last week, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights warned that any transfer of weapon or ammunition to Israel violates international law. About how many precision-guided munitions has the United States given Israel since the beginning of the war?
I don't have that number at my fingertips, but we have endeavored.
Mr. Secretary, it's about 21,000 precision-guided munitions to Israel since the start of the war. Secretary Austin, last week you spoke to Defense Minister Gallant, and you said clearly there needs to be a plan to ensure the safety and support of those sheltering in Rafah before any military operations proceed. National Security Advisor Sullivan has said he has not seen any plan yet. John Kirby said it would be a disaster to invade Rafah. If Netanyahu defies the United States and invades Rafah, will you commit today that you will halt any future military sales to Israel?
Obviously, sir, that's a presidential decision, but we expect that. And by the way, I spoke to Minister Gallant last night, and I expect that when we provide munitions to allies and partners, that they'll use them in a responsible way.
Yeah. How's that going? How's that responsible way going for you? But that figure he disclosed at the beginning, I haven't heard that before from U.S. officials, 25,000 women and children, which means that the official toll.
No, just civilians, non-involved in conflict.
Yeah.
Which is a made up.
But the official, which means the official toll of around 30,000 is far too low, because he's saying by the Pentagon's count, it's 25,000 women and children alone. And of course, I'm sure it's far higher than that. But even again, the premise that Ro Khanna kind of accepts there, that Israel shouldn't invade Rafah without a plan to protect civilians. There should be no invasion, period, no matter what plan Israel claims that it comes up with. Israel has no right to launch any operation inside of Gaza. So while I appreciate the questioning there, he shouldn't accept the premise that Israel has the right to invade Rafah if they can come up with some sort of plan to safely evacuate people.
I mean,
that's ethnic cleansing.
In my opinion, Israel has the right to go to hell.
Yeah.
And,
That's
if I were
generous.
president, U.S. tanks would be rolling up Rashid Street towards those Israeli tanks. I'd turn the USS Eisenhower around on Tel Aviv after what they did. But that's not the world we're living in. There's going to be no actual civilian protection for Palestinians here. What we're going to get, though, is the very same people who were supplying the weapons, the tools of genocide, like Lloyd Austin, who was on Raytheon's board, and Raytheon has enormous amounts of skin in the game here, including in the Iron Dome battery. They're going to be just inadvertently exposing the lies that Israel tells. And they have told us that they have killed over 10,000 Hamas operatives in Gaza. And Lloyd Austin just put the lie to that. If the official totals 30,000 and 25,000 civilians are dead, and they're just making it up, the 5,000, I mean, where do they get that from? It's a whole lot less than Israel claims. And this relates directly to Rafah. Israel has not substantially reduced the capacity of the Al-Qassam brigades and Soraya al-Quds, the armed wing of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, to fight back. They've shifted their strategy from like larger scale attacks to operating in small cellular teams where they're not actually trying to prevent Israel from moving forward or taking territory. They're simply trying to take as many bodies and destroy as much armor as they can. And that continues. According to U.S. intelligence estimates, there are still 5,000 Al-Qassam fighters operating in northern Gaza alone. So you look at the Israeli military, heavily composed of reservists. This isn't including Yamam, the special forces. These guys are clowns. I mean, you can see them day after day promoting and broadcasting not only their war crimes, but their unusual and obsessive, perverse, demented interest in the women's underwear they find in the homes of people they kill. This is not a professional army. It's like a kind of terror militia of people who are taking time away from their jobs inside Israel to attack a mostly helpless civilian population. They continue to die every week, demoralizing Israel. And they're going to send them into Rafah, where there are, let's say, at least 10,000, maybe 15,000 hardened militants. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to be a complete disaster for Israel. It's going to be a disaster for the civilian population. And the United States is doing nothing of substance that I see to stop it, but it will be a disaster for them on the world stage as well. And Netanyahu is sort of putting the countdown clock at Ramadan. One more point about that. Hamas is moving to sort of expand the conflict on Ramadan, and they are calling on people to come to Al-Aqsa and to observe the holiday, but to show up and vent their anger. Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister and total fanatic in the Israeli government, is calling on Israeli security forces to limit the number of worshipers at Al-Aqsa. But the rest of the war cabinet is not going along with him. They just want to increase the security presence. So this is an important date to watch coming up. And I think it's why it might have influenced Biden's ice cream cone licking comments about a ceasefire by Monday. I know the U.S. would like to have this wrapped up by then, but they're just not willing to impose any accountability or take anything away from Israel. So don't expect one.
And let's look for a second at the man in charge. This is a new video of Joe Biden, who confuses Ukraine and Israel while reading off some note cards.
Today, also we're going to discuss the Middle East and yesterday, tragic and alarming.
Can't really hear him.
Damn. All right, we'll have to not play that clip. Apparently, in this video, he confuses Ukraine and Israel, just like Antony Blinken did.
So yeah, Ramadan is due to begin on, I don't observe, so correct me if I'm wrong. It's due to begin on March 10th. Today is the 1st of March. It's the first of the month.
Yeah, you're right.
So the countdown clock is on. But back to my point, I do not think Israel will achieve any objective in Rafah other than mass slaughter, which is one of its objectives, but it's not the real objective. Is eradicating Hamas, releasing the hostages. They're not going to do either. And the U.S. knows it. So why do they keep saying they need to put forward a plan? They're saying they're going to do it in 10 days and they haven't put forward a plan. Isn't it time you kind of put your foot on the brakes? No.
And before we move on, just let's look at how this massacre was covered, the Flower Massacre. This is the Washington Post. Chaotic aid delivery turns deadly as Israeli Gazan officials trade blame. Yeah, you know, massacres happen to be deadly and chaotic. So, you know, it's not surprising that it turned that way because that's just what a massacre is. It's chaotic and deadly. But of course, they can't call it a massacre. It's everything is passive. You know, there's no assigning of responsibility for who actually carried out the massacre. And this is the same. This is from the New York Times. This is just like unbelievable. As hungry Gazans crowd an aid convoy, a crush of bodies, Israeli gunshots, and a deadly toll. It's like a poem or like a free association poem. Just like throw out a bunch of words that you think of in this scene. But again, with the key guidance of do not assign responsibility, culpability to Israel, which carried out the massacre.
Yeah. Imagine how many revisions those headlines had to go through. And then the worst part is as Israeli and Gazan officials trade blame. Okay, so there's no Palestine, first of all. You're not allowed to say Palestine if you're a U.S. lawmaker or an editor at Legacy Media. And as long as Israeli officials point blame somewhere else, then it becomes a he said, she said scenario. This whole thing should have been over. You know, it could have been over. A ceasefire could have been imposed by the Biden administration after the Al-Ahli Baptist Hospital massacre, which left hundreds dead. But Israel traded blame with Gaza officials. Remember, they blamed a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket misfire, as if one of those rockets is capable of killing that many people.
Yeah.
And the mainstream press accepted it. And Biden explicitly accepted the Israeli rationale, and the slaughter continued. That was what, like 25,000 deaths ago? So
yeah. I wonder how much Ivy League tuition went into this New York Times headline right here. You know, I bet that's a lot of Ivy League money.
Gazans,
right there.
They're Gazans. Israeli, a crush of bodies, Israeli gunshots, and a deadly toll. It's like it's so passive. It's like just this it's poetic in a way.
Oh, it is poetic, and I think the team that came up with this probably felt really satisfied about themselves, that as if they had come up with sort of a really artful way, some really touching prose to basically minimize, to whitewash a massacre, and felt very good about going to Brown or Yale or wherever gave them the education to come up with something like this.
Well, those headlines, they distract from the real human toll. And we happen to, have a colleague who has been out there trying to get flour for his family. He's been feeding his family with animal feed like everyone else in northern Gaza for the last 2 months. We've hosted him here at the Grayzone. He's a Gaza-based Palestinian journalist named Motassim Dahlul. And when Israel on February 25th killed some 30 people on Al Rashid spot at a gathering place for an aid truck. He became separated from his son and actually lost his young son for close to 48 hours. Just imagine, that experience psychologically as a father of just having lost your son. His son turned up, but then as he went to get flour again several days later, and he actually did secure the flour bag for his starving children. While he was gone, Israel attacked his family. At night, she told me she was hungry, Motassem says. I said I had nothing to do except risking my life to get some aid. She begged me not to go, but I insisted. I loved her too much. I loved her more than my soul. I went there and succeeded to get flour, and I was happy that she would eat with my little kids. Before I reached them, I was told they were bombed and wounded. I left the flour and rushed to the hospital, found my 16-year-old son, Asim, wounded, and her and my little angel, Abu Bakr, martyred. I got very crazy. This is his son who was wounded, his daughter who was killed, his pregnant wife was killed by Israel. We send our sympathies to our colleague Motassem in Gaza and to everyone there. This shouldn't be happening. And, you watch this and you feel metaphorically engulfed in flames. It feels so frustrating when you're so voiceless and you're so unable to make any change happen to stop this when your government is wholly responsible for this genocide. It's why so many people identify so many Americans who've been watching this live stream genocide identify with Aaron Bushnell. It's that feeling of powerlessness, of knowing you've been lied to, but there's nothing you can do concretely with the truth because you have a Biden administration in the way.
His story there, it shows how impossible this is for Gazans. So he goes out to get food for his starving family. They get killed. Other people go out to get flour for their starving family, and they get killed while they're in line for flour. So no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you're marked for death by this psychotic, satanic regime.
It's the Zionist Hunger Games. It's the literal Zionist Hunger Games, and it's being live streamed. And, life goes on here. I was out today looking at people shopping and milling around in the street and just wondering how life can continue to just go on while this is happening, but it does. Well, anyway, that'll get us demonetized. All my posts on Twitter, by the way, on the bakery massacre were soft censored. Last week, just when we just for showing part of Aaron Bushnell's immolation, maybe even for mentioning him, but we didn't show the immolation. We cut it. Our live stream was immediately age gated and demonetized and suppressed. So I was actually in IKEA earlier today and I got on their Wi-Fi and I was unable to access the Grayzone. It was blocked by the Swedes.
I've heard the same about Canada. I've gotten complaints that in Canada, people can't access our Instagram or something like that.
Yeah, that relates to a new Canadian law, which is a little bit hard to explain, but is a censorship law. We'll talk about the attack on the transatlantic attack on free speech a little later. But yeah, you can't access our Instagram in Canada because of a new law that, if any Canadians are watching this, you understand this law better than me, but it was passed basically, well, you're Canadian.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, I am.
Basically, because the rationale for passing the law, as I understand it, was that Facebook and Meta and other major social media companies based in Silicon Valley were not paying media outlets that they were featuring. Therefore, they were not allowed to feature them. But we don't want them to pay us. We just want them to give us the platform so that we can get our stuff out. So Canada won't let us do that. So it seems like it was kind of like an end around to just censor. Anyway, Um, how about the gray lady?
Should we move on to the gray lady? Okay. All right. Well, if you've watched the Grayzone, if you followed us, you've seen that from the start, we've been calling out this scam that there was sexual violence committed by Hamas militants on October 7th. This has been going on for a long time. These allegations were rolled out precisely at a time when Israel was under, global scrutiny for its atrocities in Gaza. And this has been deliberately used to try to deflect from that, to deflect for the horrors going on in front of our eyes. And now, though, the Times, the New York Times, which put out a story in late December, which we debunked at the Grayzone, is walking back some of its core claims. And this comes via The Intercept. The Intercept did a story about this, picking up on the reporting we did, which we're going to talk more about in a second, because they've done so, I think, in a really disingenuous way by not crediting the people who debunked the story that they're now following up on. But they did elicit some important admissions from the New York Times. And one of them is that the Times is now walking back its initial claim. So this is what the Times tells The Intercept now. They say that on October 7th, quote, there may have been systematic use of sexual assault. That's what a New York Times reporter told The Intercept. But that's not what the New York Times said in its story, which is still up. It says that they've uncovered, quote, a pattern of rape, mutilation, and extreme brutality against women in the attacks on Israel. So there's no qualifier there. There's no, they may have used a pattern of rape and sexual violence. They're declaring that Hamas did, but now because they've become under so much scrutiny, including from the Grayzone, they're walking that back. And, the impetus for this retraction, this tacit retraction by the Times, was that one of their contributors to this story, an Israeli woman named Anat Schwartz, has come under scrutiny because she was caught liking genocidal anti-Palestinian posts on Twitter. She was caught by the Twitter account Zay Squirrel, which then The Intercept followed up on.
So we'll sort of start from the beginning here. We came out right out of the gate when this story came out, exposing demonstrably false testimonies by supposed witnesses, inconsistencies in those testimonies, impossibilities, and discrepancies between actual evidence and what was claimed in that article. What we found was a really unprofessional rehearsal of an attempt to produce atrocity propaganda on behalf of Israel to justify its ongoing genocide in Gaza, which is infuriating. And I said from the beginning that this was one of the worst cases of journalistic malpractice on its face that I've seen since Judith Miller and her WMD lies that were published in the New York Times, fed to her by Bush administration neocons. But I also said that before we were done with him, Jeffrey Gettleman, the lead author of this article, would have to answer for what he did. So Jeffrey Gettleman was sort of compelled to issue a follow-up piece, which was obviously a response to us, as well as the Electronic Intifada and Mondo Weiss, who were also leading the way on debunking this article. And we all cite each other. We've all been citing each other all along. No one's trying to steal credit or outdo each other. We just believe in what we're doing. And Jeffrey Gettleman, instead of acknowledging inconsistencies, the whole article was framed within the context of a looming UN investigation into Hamas sexual violence. And he goes back to his sources and asks them about inconsistencies. For example, Roz Cohen, who we exposed. And Roz Cohen won't speak to him. He says, I'm too traumatized. He tries to reach Sapir, who's the Israeli police's key witness, even though the Israeli police has acknowledged there is no forensic evidence or any evidence, physical evidence to support anything she said or witnesses. And this is someone talking about 3 decapitated women, talking about witnessing several gang rapes, Hamas militants cutting off breasts with box knives and playing with them. And this elicited one of the wildest responses, which The Intercept didn't mention, which was that the Israeli police actually found the heads, and they like said it in passing, and they found the location of the heads. Right, Aaron?
Yes, they did. Here, we will show it. This is amazing. So, Gettleman is now forced to respond to those of us who debunked him. And again, as Max said, he does not actually cite or name us, but it's so obvious he's responding to all the points that we raised. Not all of them, but some of them. Some points he just couldn't respond to. Like, for example, his response doesn't mention Zaka at all, which was the scam rescue group who he relied on in part for his story. And they were caught spreading other atrocity propaganda, and he couldn't find a way to defend that, so he just ignores that. But on this issue of Sapir claiming to have seen 3 beheaded women, all of a sudden, out of the blue, Jeffrey Gettleman, and going back to reconfirm his story, has discovered from Israeli sources that 3 severed heads were found farther away, near the bodies of assailants in military fatigues, Israeli officials said, without providing more detail. So it's a throwaway line that this critical piece of forensic evidence, not 1, or not 2, but 3 severed heads have all of a sudden been found. But sorry, we can't give you any more detail. There's nothing more to say about this. And by the way, this claim has not appeared in Israeli media. So this was a Gettleman exclusive. Somehow Gettleman got the exclusive that Israeli police managed to find a missing piece of evidence, which is 3 severed heads, which were not there before, which happened to help validate the claims of one of his discredited witnesses. And there's nothing more to be said about it. Sorry, we can't give you any more detail. And he was
haven't heard about it since.
Haven't heard about this. He doesn't follow up. It's like this amazing discovery. It's like it would be like OJ claiming, I don't know, that he found the killer somewhere else. But sorry, I can't give you any more detail. That's it. I'm sorry to use OJ references, but it's just, that's a familiar one for everyone to know. It's so ridiculous. And that's what he tried to spin. And on the point about Roz Cohen saying he's too traumatized now, all of a sudden. So he wasn't too traumatized by October 7th to initially give testimony where he didn't even mention seeing any rape. And then he came up with that afterwards. He wasn't too traumatized when he took part in fashion shows and photo spreads after October 7th. And he certainly wasn't even too traumatized on October 7th to take a smiling selfie at the same time as he later claimed he was witnessing rape. And now all of a sudden that he's come under scrutiny, he's all of a sudden too traumatized to speak to Jeffrey Gettleman anymore. It's such
and then we have the family members of the woman in the black dress, Gal Abdush, who is the main exhibit of Gettleman and team, who condemned the New York Times, said there's no way she could have been sexually assaulted by Hamas when she was killed. It's pretty clear she was either killed by an RPG fired by a Hamas militant at her car, which was totally destroyed, or she was one of the many, many, many Israeli civilians who were killed by Israeli attack helicopters and tanks as part of the mass Hannibal directive that is confirmed to have taken place on October 7th. But Jeffrey Gettleman goes to her sister, Miral Alter, and calls her up and actually says, it appears that he's trying to pressure her into recanting what she said on social media, and, interviews her about that and doesn't get her to recant, or her brother-in-law. So basically it was a big fail by Gettleman to try to recover his reputation. And this was, as The Intercept reported, and we'll talk about this article next, as the Intercept's Ryan Grimm and Daniel Boguslaw reported that the New York Times had canceled an episode of its daily podcast about Gettleman and the team's reporting that was supposed to basically affirm this investigation as just this powerful look at how Hamas was so savage and, set the stage for them winning Pulitzer Prizes and many other prizes. So that was very damaging to the New York Times. And then we have this new element here, which is that Gettleman relied on 2 researchers, Anat Schwartz and Adam Sella, who were both very young. I tweeted about how Adam Sella, the day after his report came out, was thrilled about how it was on the front page, and that was his response to it. He got hammered and deleted that. He turns out to be the nephew of Anat Schwartz. And Anat Schwartz turns out to be an Israeli former military intelligence officer with negligible to no experience in journalism, at least when she started doing this article, who is basically used as Jeffrey Gettleman's fixer and his helper. So Gettleman comes in and writes the master narrative and prepares it in this compelling way. And then he goes and sells it on like panels with Hillary Clinton. But Anat Schwartz and Adam Seller were doing the legwork.
In the service of Israeli Hasbara, as they admitted.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad you brought this one up.
Yeah.
You want to?
Well, so this is from Ynet, an Israeli site, speaking to a photographer who took a picture of one of the people who Gettleman said was a rape victim, even though her family said that she wasn't, Gal Abdush. And this photographer says that they were approached by Adam Sella and Anat Schwartz, the New York Times journalists, and this is what this photographer says they claimed. They called me again and again and explained how important it is to Israeli Hasbara. And Hasbara means propaganda. So basically, these two so-called reporters were acknowledging that their mission in doing this story was to help Israeli propaganda.
That to me is one of the most scandalous elements of Jeffrey Gettleman's team. It hasn't actually been figured into any of the Intercept's reporting or much of the reporting we've seen about this. And, they've been focusing on this leg of the scandal, but it really shows, first of all, this video doesn't prove anything like Gettleman and his team claim. And they compelled the person who took the video to participate in their investigation by promising that it would basically help Israel justify its genocidal assault on Gaza. That's enormously scandalous.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole identity of Anat Schwartz and her likes on Twitter and elsewhere. I guess this was like a loose end I failed to tie up. I was looking into her background, and then others came along and did more in-depth investigating, like Z Squirrel, who found that she had liked a post calling for turning Gaza into a slaughterhouse after October 7th, something she's never explained. She actually said, I don't know, you could go to her account, and this is, I think, her pinned tweet or at the top of her account. She refers to it kind of as an inadvertent like, or like it was sort of accidental that she liked it. And she liked a post about beheaded babies, which has been discredited. But here you have someone who I guess is like 24, no journalistic experience, is thrust into one of the most historically controversial events, October 7th, by one of the most important newspapers or media publications in the world, doesn't seem to grasp the seriousness of it. And then on a podcast goes and discloses that she had called hospital after hospital in Israel and could not find any rape victims or sexual assault victims from October 7th, and describes just all the work she's doing to try to prove a thesis that had no evidence to support it up front.
Yeah, the Intercept picked up on that. She gave a podcast interview where she acknowledged that she contacted every rape crisis center, every Israeli hospital, just every possible facility that would maybe have the intake for a sexual assault victim, and she could find none. And the Times now admits this. The Times says she was told there had been no complaints made of sexual assaults. And yet, even though there was zero complaints of sexual assaults, they still went ahead and found the story by relying on basically purported witnesses making up fanciful tales. That's pretty much what the story came down to for the New York Times.
Yep. So now Anat Schwartz has sort of become the center of the scandal, and the New York Times investigated her. They cleared her because she's a Israeli Jew and not a Palestinian. The Palestinians were all fired after October 7th across the board in media. Muslims were fired for having sympathy to Palestinians. They were considered Nazis burrowing within these media institutions. Now, after 140 days of genocide, someone who liked a post calling for Gaza to be turned into a slaughterhouse was investigated. And, I'm glad this happened, and credit to everyone who scrutinized Anat Schwartz. but it's not enough. And in many ways, I've said it before, she reminds me of Lindy England, the Abu Ghraib torturer, who was a young woman who the Bush administration blamed for its entire torture program. When Jeffrey Gettleman is the one who should be punished for this. And I've said from the beginning, he should be professionally punished. He was the lead author. He put his name on this. He didn't do any vetting. He didn't do any fact checking. He didn't do what we did. You know, if this article, sorry to cut in, but if this article had come to the Grayzone and it had been about Israeli mass rape in Gaza, and I saw the same inconsistencies from witnesses, I wouldn't publish it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because you have minimal standards for journalism, but this is why it's not even just about Gettleman. What about his editors? They know exactly what he was doing. They could read his story before. I mean, certainly that story was edited from people in senior positions at the New York Times. How did they allow this to go to print? So he should be fired, but along with them as well. This is a Iraq WMD level scam.
Yes. And when you say Iraq WMD level, it's something that has been used to justify a catastrophic war. This is one of the key propaganda devices that Israel's deployed, especially targeting Joe Biden's progressive and feminist base. And here is the scandal deepening even further. The New York Times is conducting a leak investigation. This is according to a Vanity Fair reporter, a rare move for the paper following the Intercept's report on a yet-to-air episode of The Daily addressing claims of sexual violence committed by Hamas on October 7th. So the New York Times is looking for those who exposed that the paper's leadership and editors did not consider credible this investigation. They're doing damage control rather than what really needs to be done, what any ethical paper would do, which is to investigate Gettleman himself and punish them.
Yeah.
And retract this article. I don't know if they retracted Judith. I mean, there's so many phony stories in the New York Times that we've covered over the years, and none of them get retracted.
No. I mean, the thing with Judith Miller, what they did is they wrote a sort of mea culpa article years later saying that we got it wrong on some of these stories. I don't even think they retracted the initial stories though, but they did write a mea culpa way later on.
So we don't know how this is going to end up, and it's important to keep the pressure on. And, you know, I give the Intercept credit for keeping the pressure on.
Yeah, they've done something important. Yeah, no, their reporting here was important. They picked up on something that we missed, which is after Z Squirrel, which they're really picking up on, exposes Anat Schwartz's role. They found a podcast of hers in which she made some really damning admissions, and they reported on that. And they also got the story from inside the New York Times that there are people uncomfortable with Gettleman's story, and that the Daily, the podcast, couldn't do an episode about it. That's important. But I guess what we're not going to get into, what's unacceptable, in my opinion, is they're going out of their way to refuse to acknowledge the people who first debunked this story and who created the controversy around the story, which they're now picking up on.
Yep. I mean, let's start with the Ryan Grimm and Daniel Boguslaw article, which was an important piece citing sourcing inside the New York Times on the New York Times decision to shelve its daily podcast based on Gettleman and Company's Hamas mass rape hoax article. Why did that happen? Why did it decide to shelve the podcast? Because we exposed that article, not the Intercept. We did it. Electronic Intifada did it. Yeah. Mondo Weiss did it. Mondo Weiss doesn't get enough credit because a lot of their reporting was anonymous, or their debunking was done anonymously, but they did an important job. They've been doing an important job. All these this publications and other Twitter users have been doing an important job, not only with this story, but with Zaka, the fake aid, the fake rescue organization, with all the atrocity fabrications, the Hannibal directive use on October 7th. We've been out there from the beginning. So how can the Intercept tell the story of why this article fell apart and why the New York Times decided to shelve that podcast without mentioning us? It's itself journalistic malpractice. You're not telling your readers why it happened.
they're actually repeating what Jeffrey Gettleman did, because after we exposed Jeffrey Gettleman's fraud, along with Mondo Weiss and Electronic Intifada, as we talked about earlier, Gettleman wrote that follow-up piece where he had to address his unspecified critics. He says the word critics multiple times. Critics say this. He doesn't cite us, and it doesn't acknowledge us, but he's responding to the points we raised. So basically, The Intercept did the exact same thing, which is basically erase the fact that we debunked the story that created this controversy. And so it's weird there. Even like they're actually emulating his behavior. And why we could speculate. Why do even independent journalists have such contempt for other independent journalists? I mean, the most charitable version is like, I personally have been very critical of The Intercept. I make fun of them because they bought into all these scams that we've debunked: Russiagate, Syria dirty war, the Hunter Biden laptop being Russian disinformation, the Ukraine proxy war they were pretty weak on. I mean, we can go on and on. And so it's not nice to probably have to acknowledge people who criticize you and make fun of you, but there's also such thing as minimal journalistic courtesy. And for all my criticisms of The Intercept, I've never not acknowledged when they've done really important reporting. For example, Ryan Grimm helping to expose the U.S. role in the coup in Pakistan and overthrowing Imran Khan. It's really important, and I'll always credit that. But they refuse consistently to offer the same courtesy. And in this case, it's just so egregious, and we have more examples of it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, they're kind of behaving like gatekeepers, and they see themselves as sort of an alternative to, they want to be an alternative New York Times. Many of their personnel and the people working on these stories are people who might have worked in the New York Times if the media environment was a little bit better. I know their culture. They all have kind of mainstream aspirations, and they aspire to respectability within major American media. It's a different mentality than we have at the Grayzone, where we just see the entire media as an enemy of the people. And I have no aspiration to respectability among them. I want the respect of you watching right now. I just want to tell the truth. And I also think, having been in media for like 20 years or more, journalists are the worst people I've ever met. Like, it just attracts the worst, most narcissistic, sociopathic people. And they have no ethics, and most of them are a bunch of frauds. So yeah, I kind of the Grayzone's like a place for people who hate the media. It's like the early seasons of The Simpsons, like when there was like, I was still watching The Simpsons with like an antenna with aluminum foil on it. And there was like 2 channels or 3 channels I could get. And it was like the one show for people who hated TV, and hated TV shows, and just the whole, and hated, mass American post-Cold War kind of this imperial feel-good culture. Like, we're so happy that we have Sizzler. It's the same thing. The Intercept, it sits kind of between that and the New York Times. And right now they're trying to have their moment with all this interest in Palestine. And so they basically Israeled our content. I mean, let's be real. They're Israeling the crap out of the Grayzone. EI is calling it out. Ali, Tamara, everyone at EI is calling it out. They know that it's just unethical what they're doing. And the reason that they did it is because I know their culture. And like, I know their culture because like I've been around it. Like, you've been around the nation, Aaron. They don't want the word intifada in their article, or to say the Grayzone. You look at our Wikipedia page, it's like just a complete hit job, because they want the respectability of people in mainstream media. And they'll say, oh, well, we won't make the same impact if we give credit where it's due.
Yeah.
So we can't mention them. They're the unmentionables. They're untouchable. And we are part of this media Brahmin class.
It's the flack filter that Chomsky and Herman talked about in Manufacturing Consent, that like, if somebody dissents in a way that's too damaging to the establishment, then they're going to get flack, and that will deter people from following suit, and also deter people from acknowledging them. And unfortunately, people call themselves independent journalists and have done good work, fall into that. They just don't want to have the trouble of being associated with acknowledging people who actually do the work we're supposed to do as journalists. And maybe also because they don't do that work consistently on all the issues, then they don't want to acknowledge people who do. And an example of that, unfortunately, is my former workplace, Democracy Now!, where I learned so much about independent media, which I'm very grateful for. But unfortunately, they continue to erase the work we do. So this is how they framed the Intercept's latest article. A new expose by The Intercept has found major discrediting flaws in the New York Times December investigation claiming that Hamas committed systemic rape on October 7th. And they spoke to Ryan Grimm and Jeremy Scahill about it. I'm sorry, no. The Intercept did not find major discrediting flaws. Electronic Intifada, Grayzone, and Mondo Weiss did, and the Intercept picked it up. And why is it so hard to just acknowledge that? Like, I'll never be invited on Democracy Now!, and I'm okay with that. I don't expect to be on interviewed. But if you're going to cover a story that other people have done first, you can at least acknowledge that, and it's just so petty. It's really, really, really petty.
Yeah. Here's another point that needs to be made is that while we were debunking this stuff, they were making it hard for us because they were saying things like this. This is Judith Levine, one at The Intercept. This is The Intercept. What was this? December 24th. One thing is true. Hamas and other Palestinian militants committed unspeakable sexual violence against Israeli civilians on October 7th. The full scale of the assault is yet to be uncovered, according to a position paper published by Physicians for Human Rights Israel, an NGO. And that paper, it contains mostly the same sources that you see in the New York Times article. They're all recycled through all these different papers. It's just like a laundering operation, a Hasbara laundering operation. But where's the accountability there?
Yeah, and that article also said this. Yet, yes, some individuals in extreme left organizations have denied these atrocities or upheld them as justified resistance. Which is just such a malicious lie that someone has said that rape is justified resistance. It's an insane lie, and it was never corrected. And I spoke to somebody at The Intercept who I'm sure is watching right now. I'm not going to disclose who it is because I actually have ethics. I'm going to respect our private correspondence. This person defended that story and declined to do anything about it. And then now The Intercept is going and claiming that they have been at the forefront of debunking this sexual violence scam. And unfortunately, Democracy Now! Did the same thing. They also parroted this Hamas sexual violence story in an actually probably in a way that's just as embarrassing.
Yeah. And so Democracy Now! Is doing the same thing at the same time.
I got
we don't have volume here, but
I got the clip. I got it.
The UN Monday heard accounts of sexual assaults during Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel. Speakers criticized the UN and others for failing to promptly investigate and condemn sexual crimes. Former Facebook executive Sheryl Sandberg, who helped organize the event, was a key speaker. Hillary Clinton sent videotaped remarks. President Biden Tuesday condemned Hamas for the alleged attacks, which the group has denied. The nonprofit Physicians for Human Rights Israel last month released a report detailing survivor accounts of sexual assaults, which it said were widespread on October 7th.
Okay, this is why it's really important on all stories, but especially on a story like this, you have to have evidentiary standards. And if you're going to say something like that on the air, you have to back it up. So they're actually even mischaracterizing that Physicians for Human Rights Israel report. It did not have survivor accounts. It didn't speak to any alleged survivors. It referenced basically rumors about accounts, but it didn't speak to anybody. So Democracy Now! There is totally mischaracterizing it in a really, really unfortunate way. And also, if you're going to cite a source like that, then you should scrutinize it first. And that's what we did. And if you look at Physicians for Human Rights Israel, one of the first things you'll see is that one of their main sources is Zaka, which is a scam group that has been caught spreading multiple other October 7th atrocity lies. And so therefore, that's immediately discrediting. If one of your main sources is a scam organization, then that taints your entire so-called report. And unfortunately, Democracy Now! Didn't do its due diligence in just parroting this, while also spreading a lie that even the initial report didn't even say.
Yeah. Okay. Let's watch the rest of it.
This is Orit Soliciano, head of Israel's Association of Rape Crisis Centers.
Most of the people, I assume, that have passed this kind of terror are dead because they were shot. There is information from people who saw what happened, but everybody should understand there should not be any anticipation that the survivors will come and speak out loud with their face. It's not like Me Too. This is a horrible and different thing.
Okay, well, you look like a convincing feminist, so I guess I'll just believe you. You look like a feminist from Central Casting, so it must be true. Amy Goodman certainly believed it. We won't hear any testimony. We won't get any evidence. This is a different thing. And by the way, that group came out with a bogus report that we've debunked at the Grayzone.
Which CNN recently parroted in a really embarrassing way. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, when it was uncomfortable and difficult to challenge this obvious propaganda, you at The Intercept and Democracy Now! Promoted it and helped Israel consolidate the narrative. And now that it's easy to do so, because we helped clear the way, because we put a grenade in the wall and blew up a hole for all of you guys to run through, you're stealing all the credit and you're Israeling our content. And it needs to be called out.
Yeah, it would be great if basically they could just say, this story, this scam was uncovered by Electronic Intifada, Grayzone, Mondo Weiss. They did this, blah, blah, blah. And now we're picking, if it were that, then it would be a cool story about independent media harnessing its collective power to like punch through the mainstream, punch through a mainstream lie. That's what it should be about. But if someone's going to go and pretend as if we didn't do this first and we didn't expose this, we didn't create a controversy to begin with, I'm sorry, it has to be called out. I don't want to spend my time asking for credit, but if it's being denied in such a deliberate way, it has to be called out. It's just unethical. It's just basically unethical, and that's why it's important to spend time on it.
Well, their piece, which I mean is an important piece on Anat Schwartz, and the whole scandal around Anat Schwartz. It's called. I mean, look at what it's called. I mean, again, this needs to be addressed. The piece is called "The Story Behind the New York Times October 7th Expose," but it doesn't tell the story because it doesn't include us, EI, and Mondo Weiss, and the others who debunked this story as those who did so. It doesn't explain how it was debunked or how it fell apart, or how we got to Anat Schwartz. Right. This is the first time that I or the Grayzone has been acknowledged in their reporting. I went to them directly and said, are you going to acknowledge us this time now that you're looking into this, and actually help point them to some research? So, and again, we've always acknowledged them. So they're not telling the story. So that's just not journalistic. We're referred to in passing here at the end, along with Ali Abunema at the Electronic Intifada and Mondo Weiss. It's just not, it ain't the story.
Yeah, and what they do is they link to one of your tweets, which is about one issue, which is Roz Cohen, which is fine. But we did a whole story, which again, as I've said before, was mostly your work, Max. This was a lot of work you did on this. I helped out a little bit. This was mostly your work, debunking the New York Times story exhaustively. And we sent our findings to the Times, which then forced them to respond, along with what Mondo Weiss and Electronic Intifada did. And they don't link to that story for some reason. They just really want to go out of their way to not acknowledge the reporting and the investigative work that came before them.
And they've done it again. They did it again with Zaka. They did a piece on Zaka where months ago I discredited every single claim that Zaka has put out, went into how they've been fundraising off these bogus claims. The piece got enormous traction. And here comes Arun Gupta with a piece for The Intercept on Zaka. And so much independent media has been exposing the crap out of Zaka. American media keeps citing Zaka, though its October 7th atrocity stories are discredited in Israel. And one person I cited, by the way, was Brad Pierce, who's on Substack, who did an enormously important piece on Zaka before I did, and I cited him. So why didn't Arun? I try to cite anyone who, whose research I rely on or who gets to it first. Yeah. I don't care, if they're, considered toxic. Anyway, Arun, who writes like one article a year, I don't know what he does. He's like been working on this book about like the politics of food or something ever since I met him 10 years ago. So this is his annual contribution, basically Israeling and biting my work. He actually got into an exchange with Brad Pierce about why he didn't cite Brad's work on Zaka and why he didn't cite my work. And it's very revealing. And so someone said Wayward Rabbler, that's Brad Pierce, essentially had this whole story on October 18th, which he did, which I cited, the sordid history of the Zaka Rescue Service. And here's Arun. He had some good material, but the report is 4 months old. He makes factual mistakes and endorses the Ghoul Zone lie, referring to the Grayzone, that the White Helmets were practically an arm of Al-Qaeda.
Oh, okay.
Which they were.
So he's a Syria dirty war dupe. Okay. And that's why he doesn't want to cite you, maybe, because he's a dupe. All right. Okay.
What's like, that is the puerile, sophomoric, juvenile level that we're dealing with with Intercept contributors. Yeah. That we're the Ghoul Zone. By the way, I mean, where did we get it wrong on the White Helmets? But it's not relevant to this story.
Yeah, but it shows actually there's a pettiness there, because I mean, like, it's not as if I wouldn't cite the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Intercept, even though they've pushed all these discredited stories like, Russiagate or the Hunter Biden laptop or anything else. But the fact is, then he's showing there he's like bitter about our stance on one certain story, which is unrelated, which is Syria, and therefore can't be mentioned. That's just extremely petty. Even if we were wrong, which of course we're not. There's who can refute a single thing we've ever written about the White Helmets? Nobody has. But
I think that is a key piece here, is that we were right on Syria. We exposed the White Helmets while Murtaza Hussein was literally taking press releases from the Syria campaign, the public relations arm of the White Helmets, and turning it into articles for The Intercept, not mentioning how the White Helmets were sponsored by British intelligence and the US government and the Qatari government, and that they were basically the MASH unit of Al-Qaeda, which he supported. I mean, he debated me as a non-Syrian on behalf of Al-Qaeda and ISIS as why Syria should be destroyed. Recently appeared as a non-Palestinian on The Daily Show, alongside
terrible.
Some like ultra Zionist propagandist who's his buddy, on how Israelis and Palestinians can get together. And Jon Stewart was like, gosh, golly, why can't Hamas and Israel get together like this?
Yeah, no, Jon Stewart was like genuinely gratified that he brought together a Muslim and a ultra extremist anti-Palestinian Jew to like talk, as if that was some noble feat, as if this whole this whole issue is like a religious one and not about a settler colonial genocidal state stealing someone else's land. That was one of the worst things I've ever seen on TV. But
Hamas and the PFLP don't want to get ahead in US media by sucking up to Jewish guys, so they're not going to be at the table there.
Yeah, there's so many Palestinian voices that could have been brought on. I mean, the fact that he was brought on to represent Muslims, he's not even Palestinian, is just, that's so unfortunate. And anyway, that was terrible. But since we're on the topic of
Zaka, just this whole culture of fake alternative media, where it's just wannabe New York Times media, that's what we're talking about now. They're all a bunch of gatekeepers and soft imperialists. The Palestine thing is easy for them because Palestinians are so much more powerless than, for example, the Syrian or Russian government to resist US empire. And they come in late in the game when it's safe and then steal all the credit and ignore everyone who did the initial hard work and heavy lifting and took the attacks. I mean, I got attacked like 5 times in Haaretz for what we've done. And the
Yeah,
Washington Post smeared us.
Yeah, and the Nation magazine, where I used to write, called us rape denialists or something like that.
Yeah, their top second wave feminist,
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton propagandist, Katha Pollitt, basically called us. I mean, she came as close as she could to calling us rapists. Something she reserved for Matt Taibbi and Mark Ames, which didn't work out well for her. So, yeah, this is that whole media that we kind of come from, but we left.
Yeah.
Is just it really is revealing itself right now.
Yeah, listen, that is where I come from. My formative years were at Democracy Now! I learned a ton there. I'm very grateful for it, and it's unfortunate that now is a situation where the independent journalism that I do and that I'm involved in, which comes in that tradition, now is somehow seen as like antagonistic, like on the opposite side of my former colleagues. It's weird. And speaking of Syria, they bought into all that stuff too. It's too bad, and there's never any accountability.
It's like we can't say it enough. Look at Syria right now. Like, where is the outrage when Rashida Tlaib is introducing a bill that will starve Syrians, when the U.S. military controls 1/3 of the country where the oil wells are, when Israel just attacked Damascus again, and you don't hear anything from them.
No.
But they, the U.S. left, the sort of professional left, PMC left, they played their part in suppressing dissent against this dirty war on Syria, which is now clearly a U.S.-Israeli war. They've lifted the mask and now they're saying nothing, moving right along.
Yeah. And, if you're seeking sort of mainstream acceptance, quote unquote credibility, then you will still feel the pressure to pander to the narrative. And that's also what The Intercept has done with their work on the story. And, listen, I understand this. I've done this before, actually, pandering to false things. I didn't consciously know they were false, but
so have I.
Subconsciously, there's an imperative that I understand the pressure, but they're doing this here again with this rape story. So this is Ryan Grimm on Democracy Now! Today, talking about, the story that we did without crediting us. But this is what he says about the issue of rape on October 7th.
Two ways to think about what happened on October 7th. The first way is that it was a day of extraordinary mayhem and violence. The Israeli defenses melted away. Not only did you have several thousand Hamas fighters stream across the fence, but you also had hundreds of civilians, some associated with gangs, come across. And in that context, the idea that there would be no sexual assault is not taken seriously by pretty much anybody who understands kind of war and violence. That's one way to think about October.
So you see what he's doing there? He's trying to pander to the narrative by saying that, the idea that there'll be no sexual violence is not taken seriously because this is a war after all. Well, first of all, this wasn't a war. This is actually a one-day guerrilla operation with surveillance cameras everywhere. And so you can't frame this as like in the context of like a normal war. So therefore it's quite plausible or likely that sexual violence occurred. This is a one-day guerrilla operation, which is far different than a war. And, so if you're serious, you understand that. And second of all, you don't like the standard for an allegation is that, well, it very well could have happened. The standard for an allegation is there credible evidence to support it? And in the absence of any credible evidence, you don't have to pander to it, as Ryan Grimm is doing here. And they do the same thing in their story too. There's someone on Twitter pointed this out. Her handle is Krista Peterso, goes by Word Cited. And basically in the story, they also say, they go out of their way to say this: the question has never been whether individual acts of sexual assault may have occurred on October 7th. Listen, you don't have to pander to that possibility if there's no evidence to support it. If there's actually credible evidence, you can point to this and say, this might be a case of it. But if there is none, then why are you pandering to it? You're pandering to it because you want still, quote unquote, credibility. You want to be accepted by the mainstream.
And be respected.
Going to be respected. Yeah. And so that's why, on top of the fact that it's lame to steal credit for a story you didn't do first, it's lame then if you become if now people think you're the only ones debunking the story, because then the people who are perceived to be the ones debunking are still pandering to it, which is really unfortunate.
Well, Aaron, you just don't understand violence and war because you're a member of the ghoul zone.
I am going to start using that. It's pretty funny. The ghoul zone.
Yeah. So ghoulish to debunk imperial propaganda.
That is
I
what
mean,
some people think. Yes, that actually is what people think. It's ghoulish to debunk imperial propaganda. That's exactly what some people think.
I mean, the reason why it was like psychologically easy for me to come out and say this is bogus on a story where you knew the initial line of defenses, you're basically denying the Holocaust. The reason why was because we have exposed so much imperial propaganda that places like the Democracy Now! And The Intercept have pushed over the years. For example, the Uyghur genocide,
Yes,
the staged chemical attacks in Syria,
the white helmets,
on and on and on. I mean, this is just part of the playbook of Western imperialism, and specifically of states that aren't able, or entities like, for example, the Syrian armed opposition, that aren't able to achieve their objectives of regime change on their own without the assistance of the United States. And Israel needs to keep the U.S. engaged. They need to keep the air bridge of weapons coming, and they ultimately want the U.S. to attack Iran on their behalf. So you can, it was psychologically easy. Whereas these other publications that are soft imperialists, or like, Jeremy Scahill couldn't bring himself to talk about the dirty war on Syria, even though his book was called Dirty Wars. In many ways, he just hung up his cleats for a few years there. It's hard for them to get back in the game here, or to, and they basically had to wait to see if it was credible. Let's see if these attacks on Max Blumenthal are working. Let's see if he's getting to, oh, wait, no, it's actually true. Okay, let's go, guys, everybody get on this, and fundraise, send out a few fundraising letters too, that we're doing the work on Palestine. We're leading the way.
Yeah. All right. Well,
that was therapeutic.
Yeah, and thanks to everybody who's acknowledged us. Thanks to everybody who's done the work along with us.
Oh, wait, one more. Look at this fraud. Mehdi Hassan has launched Zeteo, an answer to the failings of the mainstream media. You are the mainstream media. And what the hell is Zeteo? Is that like the Billy Blank's like karate workout? Like, what the hell kind of name is that? I know you're going to get some good Google SEO because no one else is called Zeteo, but you worked for MSNBC. You were helping the mainstream media all along. And you yourself said Biden's foreign policy was great until October 6th. Yeah, the Ukraine proxy war, occupying Syria is all great because you supported all that. And now you're against the mainstream media. Man, everybody, whether it's on the left or on the right, you have this fake mainstream alternative media trend where people who want to be in the mainstream and couldn't get there, or who were in the mainstream and got pushed out because they said like one too many true things, like Mehdi said about Palestine. They're all brave, independent, alternative warriors now. They're dissidents.
I wish Mehdi luck with his new venture. I genuinely do. He's a talented broadcaster. My issue with him is that he left punched his way into MSNBC, and after he got thrown out, now he's back to claiming he's like the antidote to the establishment, forgetting that he got into the establishment by attacking those of us who are not the establishment. And I had many spats with him because I didn't buy into Russiagate. He did, and on and on, on and on and on. But I genuinely wish him luck. I think anyone doing independent media is a good thing. People learning that they're not going to be able to exist inside these mainstream institutions. But already I can see how it's going to go with him. He's going to try to, and this is sort of like this is the dynamic you're talking about. It's like people in independent media who still adopt the mainstream's talking points, and then that becomes the face of independent media, and that part is dangerous. And I look forward to fighting against that as Mehdi tries to do that with his new venture.
I remember that the Intercept did this promo video, and the thing he said is, I want to write about Uyghur concentration camps. That's what I want to do, because he was at the Intercept while he was at Al Jazeera before he was at MSNBC. It's like, I just see media as a tool to educate people and get a message across and maybe change things. Obviously there are ethics you have to follow. You have to tell the truth, but I don't see it as an end in itself. So just because you want to stay in media and something unfair might have happened to you at MSNBC, doesn't mean that I'm going to support what you're doing. If you're misusing and abusing media. And you can see the way he's selling it. He's selling it. Oh, Trump is the greatest evil, and the media has helped Trump. I mean, are you kidding me? I've never seen the media turn on a U.S. president like they've turned on Trump, or attack him more unfairly especially when he was trying to do the right thing, like make peace on the Korean Peninsula. So that's not the reason to be an independent media. The reason to be an independent media is to give the finger to the corporate duopoly.
Well, on that note, let me announce some good news. Someone recognized for their good work doing exactly just that, challenging the duopoly. Max has just won the 2003 Pierre Sprey Award, the top prize. And this is Ben Cohen, the founder of this award, announcing it. He says Max Blumenthal's rigorously researched work and October 7th testimonies reveal Israel's military shelling Israeli citizens, brought to light truths otherwise assiduously ignored in the MSM. Actually, let me read the full citation. Here we go. Almost all reports on the current U.S.-backed Israeli war in Gaza come to us heavily laced with misinformation and lies. That is why the work of Max Blumenthal, who has the benefit of in-depth reporting on Israel and Gaza and previous wars in the Grayzone, has been not only invaluable but also indispensable. Most importantly, in rigorously sourced reports such as, and they mentioned some of your articles, Max Blumenthal brought to light truths otherwise assiduously ignored in the mainstream media. And I know you like this part, Max. His work has been significant enough to elicit a tribute in the form of a shoddily crafted smear job in the Washington Post. We proudly acknowledge the importance of Blumenthal's work with the Pierre Sprey Journalism Award. So it's so good to see this honor. And Max, you're honored along with two other great journalists, Gareth Porter, the legend, and Dave DeCamp of Anti-War News. But, like so many people, I've relied on the work you do to help us understand October 7th, what really happened then, and the broader context of Israeli apartheid. And your work, is, as it says there, has been invaluable. So it's great to see you being given this honor.
Well, thank you. And, it was a group effort. We did it together. These live streams, I think, have been invaluable for people. And we did a lot of the debunking live on these streams together. I also, collaborated a lot with Wyatt Reed on debunking October 7th propaganda. It's been a total team effort. And again, it's really nice to be recognized. It's harder to be recognized when you feel like you're helping create consciousness among people, wake them up to propaganda, but it doesn't end the war. And that's really, the prize that I want to see. I want to see our colleagues and friends stop being killed in Gaza. It's an honor. It's a huge honor to be recognized alongside Gareth, who's worked with us at the Grayzone. I've known him for many years, and editing Gareth has been one of my favorite activities at the Grayzone, because I learned so much from his pieces. He puts so much scholarship. He blends scholarship and journalism in such a masterful way. And we're going to be publishing, and I think we're going to be publishing a new Gareth Porter piece next week. And Gareth he's in his 80s. And he's still just doing a masterful job putting Joe Biden to shame. And Dave DeCamp is holding it down at antiwar.com. He's incredibly prolific. Every day he has at least several articles breaking down the most important issues. So it'll be great to be recognized with them. And huge thanks to the committee and to Ben Cohen. Pierre Sprey, someone I got to know very late in his life, who is an iconoclast and kind of a defense industry whistleblower who helped design the F-16, but then blew the whistle on the later designs and how wasteful they were. He was also anti-war activist, someone I met through Fritzy Cohen at the Tabard Inn, and which is one of the last kind of sanctuaries for the anti-war movement in Washington, D.C. And he also made some innovations in sound design. A lot of people don't know, Pierre Sprey ran a recording studio, was a jazz aficionado, and designed speakers and did sound design. I think it's called Maplewood, his company. But anyway, I couldn't ask for a better award to get. And I know that, and I know this award because you won it very deservedly last year, Aaron, for your work on the OPCW and the Syrian dirty war.
Well, it was always awkward for me that I won an award like that and you didn't. So this makes me feel a lot better that finally you get recognized for all the work you've done. Because again, as I said last year when I won the award for the Syria work, is that that wouldn't have been possible without you. Again, similar with this New York Times rape scam story, you led the way in debunking it first, creating the space for me to come in and follow up with the work I did on the OPCW scandal. So this is very, very fitting. It's great to see. And yeah, I look forward to celebrating with you. Before we move on,
Definitely.
I wanted to
and thank you everyone in the chat for the congratulations. Glad that you all could be a part of this too.
Before we move on, I wanted to share something that I found out this week, which I didn't know before, which is that this guy, remember him? The guy who was caught harassing
How could I forget a face like that?
halal cart vendors in New York City and, bragging over the murders of Palestinian children. What's his name? Stuart Seldowitz.
Yeah.
He is a former Obama administration official. Well, he sits on the advisory board of Zaka, the scam Israeli rescue group that spread October 7th atrocity propaganda that Max Blumenthal exposed and has now won an award for exposing. And I found this by going to the website zakaworld.org, where they talk about forming an advisory board in New York City. And there it is. Stuart Seldowitz's name is on it down there. He was there at the inaugural meeting of the board. And there's even a picture. You can see him. He's in the far, he's second from the left. It's too hard to, yeah. That's him. That's his smirk back there. He's obstructed, but that is Stuart Seldowitz. How fitting that a guy who's such a fanatic that he couldn't contain himself from harassing and stalking halal cart vendors, Muslim Arab halal cart vendors in New York City. How fitting that he sits on the board of a scam group that's been used to justify the very atrocities that he celebrates.
Trying to find the footage of him. I think his rant was just so racist and insane. What was he saying? If we killed 4,000 Palestinian kids, it wasn't enough. I don't know if this is the rant. This is him still, the vendor. He's waving an Israeli flag. I hadn't seen this one before.
No.
Okay, go. Do you want to buy something?
No, I don't.
Okay, why stay here?
I won't give you a penny of my money.
Listen. Why stay here?
What?
Do you want to buy something?
No.
Okay, go.
I don't want to go. I have a right to stay here. You have no right to be on the sidewalk. Do you have a permit?
Yeah, I have a permit. I have everything. I have a license.
Okay, but you don't have a visa.
I have a passport, my friend. Go.
What do you have?
It's not your business. Go.
Oh, it is my business because I actually know the guy who owns all these.
I have an American citizen. Do you have it?
American citizen?
Yeah, do you have it?
How? How did you become an American citizen?
It's not your business. Go.
Oh, you're right.
I'm born here.
But you're a terrorist. You support terrorism.
Listen, go. I'm not support something.
You do. You support terrorism.
I'm not some. Go. I'm just working here.
You're a terrible person.
You kill children, not me.
What?
Go.
My kids? What about my kids?
You kill children, not me. Go.
I didn't kill children.
Okay, why stay here?
You know why? If we killed 4,000 Palestinian kids, you know what? It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough.
Go.
So that's, this is New York Zaka's board member, Stuart Seldowitz, who actually was arrested for serially harassing these halal cart vendors. He's a criminal. He's a hate criminal. But you can really see the mentality of that organization. They're genocidal. They want to justify what Israel's doing. And they, as Haaretz reported, they actually supplanted Israel's military rescue divisions, the Home Front Command. They supplanted them after October 7th and came in with no coronary credentials, no forensic experience, and took charge of collecting all these bodies and then lying about it. In one case, they were even filmed or seen raising money on the phone with a body of a corpse of someone who was killed on October 7th staged near them so they could show potential donors what they were doing. They were actually staging scenes. And you know, as The Intercept points out, the U.S. media continues to cite them. What's her name? Shuri Frankel, the New York Times Silicon Valley like social media reporter. She did a puff piece on Zaka this year. So
yeah, I forgot the line she used to downplay the fact that they've been caught lying multiple times, but it was such a whitewash. It was, again, the Times' artful way of covering up just fraud. But it was, yeah.
It was that guy Yossi Landau who was responsible for so many of the bogus testimonies about beheaded babies and the fetus cut from a pregnant woman who was killed. He told her, "I really wish I could have taken photographs, but it wasn't allowed." And then we learned from Haaretz that they took many photographs, so many, because they wanted to fundraise off of them. So he just lied.
Yeah, this is a classic example here. Let me show you how the Times spins Zaka's lies. Okay, and again, this is them. They're responding to us because at this point, you, Max, have already published your pieces well before this debunking Zaka. So they're responding to us, but they can't name us because they just refuse to do that. Like The Intercept. Some activists, of course, they can't acknowledge journalism. They have to call us activists. Some activists, who they won't name, seeking to deny that militants raped and mutilated victims on October 7th, have said Zaka volunteers' testimony is unreliable because the men are not medical experts or police officers trained in investigating sex crimes. That's actually not really what we said. We said was that they were caught lying, spreading fabricated claims, and that they acknowledged that they destroyed forensic evidence. That's what we said. And then she goes on to say some Zaka members have given misleading accounts to the news media, and some imposters posing as volunteers have given false information in the group's names. So first of all, they didn't give misleading accounts about beheaded babies. They lied about beheaded babies. It's not misleading. And this thing about imposters posing as volunteers, is that an attempt to suggest that the people who are caught lying weren't actually a part of Zaka? That's what it reads like to me.
What's the reporter's name? Sherry Frankel or
Sherry Frankel, yeah.
Shira Frankel.
Shira Frankel.
Yeah, I met her once when she was at McClatchy,
Uh-huh.
the wire service, when she was in Israel. She was reporting from Israel. And a reporter there later showed me a photo of her and the Wall Street Journal correspondent taking a shot with an IDF, Israeli army spokesman, at his birthday party at a Tel Aviv bar, and they were all like raising shots to him. And it didn't shock me at all because that's how the media, like the international press, is there. So there you go. This is such a huge scandal, and there needs to be consequences, but there probably won't be, and this is why just everybody hates mainstream media, and it's not because of disinformation in alternative media. It's because they are the propagators of disinformation. And it has real world consequences, real life consequences, because they have helped Israel generate political space for a genocide. I think they've run out of political space at this point, and they're living on borrowed time from the Biden administration, especially after what happened in Michigan, 100,000 uncommitted voters voting in a Democratic primary, basically in protest of the Gaza genocide. There's no more political space, but they gave them just enough to get the genocidal gears of their apartheid war machine going. And that's why I think the artwork that we featured on this live stream by Natrix is so important, because it shows editions of the New York Times and Wall Street Journal spattered in blood. Julian Assange famously asked, what is the body count of the average journalist working in mainstream media? By the way, just spoke to, I interviewed Gabriel Shipton, Julian Assange's brother, yesterday. So that'll be up at the Grayzone. And the Nord Stream investigation has been closed in Sweden and Denmark. I interviewed Eric Anderson, who he worked with on his independent expedition to the Nord Stream blast sites. So we'll also look for that at our sites. A huge cover up in the worst act of industrial sabotage and terror in our lifetimes. I don't know. Is there anything else you want to cover?
Well, should we talk about some good news in the Western world, which is pretty rare?
Yeah, we should do it. At least briefly. This is delicious.
George Galloway, who's a very famous for challenging the Iraq War and every other pro-war deception, outspoken supporter of the Palestinians. He was a longtime British member of Parliament, and then he left and has been working as a news host, basically, and other ventures. But now he just won re-election to the British Parliament, running for the Workers' Party of Britain in Rochdale. And here he is celebrating his win.
Keir Starmer, this is for Gaza. You have paid and you will pay a high price for the role that you have played in enabling, encouraging, covering for the catastrophe presently going on in occupied Palestine in the Gaza Strip. Keir Starmer.
And here's what else he said.
Starmer and Rishi Sunak are two cheeks of the same backside. And they both got well and truly spanked tonight here in Rochdale.
You love to see it. You love to see it. An actual principled person, someone of conscience, someone with a record of challenging war in a very brave fashion, actually succeeding in electoral politics. It doesn't happen. It never happens. So it's great to see. Congratulations to George Galloway. And thank you to the people of Rochdale.
Yeah. Huge congratulations to George, who has been a stalwart supporter of us. And I've learned a lot from him in knowing him. This is something that's so needed right now, is just someone to at least be a gadfly in Westminster and to torment the likes of Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, who are simply controlled by the Israel apartheid lobby and the decaying transatlantic elite. And the meltdown is just beginning in London. This is Rishi Sunak today.
In recent weeks and months, we have seen a shocking increase in extremist disruption and criminality. What started as protests on our streets has descended into intimidation, threats, and planned acts of violence. Jewish children fearful to wear their school uniform lest it reveal their identity. Muslim women abused in the street for the actions of a terrorist group they have no connection with. Now our
Did you hear how he blamed Hamas for Muslim women getting abused? Anyway.
Democracy itself is a target. Council meetings and local events have been stormed. MPs do not feel safe in their homes. Long-standing parliamentary conventions have been upended because of safety concerns. And it is beyond alarming that last night, the Rochdale by-election returned a candidate who dismisses the horror of what happened on October the 7th, who glorifies Hezbollah and is endorsed by Nick Griffin, the racist former leader of the BNP. I need to speak to you all this evening because this situation has gone on long enough and demands a response not just from government, but from all of us. Britain is a patriotic, liberal, democratic society with a proud past and a bright future. We're a reasonable country and a decent people. Our story is one of progress, of great achievements and enduring values. Immigrants who have come here have integrated and contributed. They have helped write the latest chapter in our island story. They have done this without being required to give up their identity. You can be a practicing Hindu and a proud Briton as I am, or a devout Muslim and a patriotic citizen as so many are, or a committed Jewish person and the heart of your local community, and all underpinned by the tolerance of our established Christian church. We are a country where we love our neighbors.
Right. We love them, unless they support Palestine, in which case we're going to suspend all free speech rights for them and prosecute them, which is what he's basically doing. I mean, I couldn't hear anything but the suspension of whatever's left of free speech in the UK, and just a completely delicious meltdown over George Galloway's victory, which he calls beyond alarming.
Well, speaking of meltdown, do we want to talk about the reaction of Grayzone friend Paul Mason, the guy?
Yeah, I got it right here. This is Paul. Right. This is Paul Mason.
And let's remind people who Paul Mason is. He's a British media pundit who was associated with the left, who was caught plotting to undermine Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, we caught him.
Did we? Well, but back when Corbyn was
okay,
but he was caught then undermining Corbyn. Like on remember, like there's that videotape of him meeting with someone, like a secret recording where he's talking about undermining Corbyn, and then he was caught in leaked emails that we received, plotting to destroy the Grayzone. Speaking with a British intelligence operative about ways to destroy the Grayzone, and that's where he produced one of my favorite lines of all time, where he acknowledged that Bellingcat, another favorite of the Grayzone, great friends of ours, he said that they receive a steady supply of Western intelligence info and that they could help out in his plot against the Grayzone.
He called them intel by proxy. Intel by proxy.
Intel by proxy. Yeah.
Which is what they are.
Yeah.
And so basically we had emails of Paul Mason reporting to an intelligence agent, a British intelligence agent, as his kind of handler, proposing ideas for cracking down on the left and propagandizing for conflict with Russia. He put together his mind map, his infamous mind map, in which he links the entire Corbynite left to Russia and China. And then he had hoped to plan an anti-Grayzone summit with Bellingcat to expose our non-existent links to Russia. So Paul Mason is a security state collaborator and snitch, and he's freaking out over George Galloway. I don't want to see any left activists or trade union leaders dabbling in schadenfreude over Galloway's attacks on Keir Starmer. Oh, don't make Paul Mason mad. If we come home from the factory, Paul Mason's going to wag his finger at you, and you won't have your pudding. You won't be able to get your pint. This is a defeat for our whole movement, and we fight the guy now to the finish. Yes, we'll storm the beaches and we'll storm the beaches against George Galloway. If he uses Parliament to push Russian TV style disinfo, this is Paul Mason in his security state collaborator mode. We need a united cross-party militant defense of democracy. The National Security Act 2023 does not exempt MPs from its provisions. So Paul Mason is calling for criminal prosecution of George Galloway if he basically questions British foreign policy under a new law, which Kit Clarenberg and Mohammed El-Mazi have exposed and explained at the Grayzone. Just go to the front page of our site. McCarthyite, terrifying draconian new law, which allows for the criminal prosecution of British citizens if they share what is deemed to be Russian propaganda or anything that contravenes British national security interests, even if they don't know that they are sharing Russian propaganda or something that was obtained by Russian hackers. Even if they don't know, it's suspicionless. So, and I really feel like Paul Mason played a role in advocating for the passage of that law. So he's calling for the criminalization of George Galloway. This is the, professional British left speaking.
What makes this especially funny is that Paul Mason has tried and failed to run for parliament, and
he must be jealous.
Yeah, he must be jealous. This is George Galloway's, I think it's his first attempt to come back to parliament after previously serving in office. But regardless, George Galloway won resoundingly. This was a huge victory for him, running, of course, outside the Labor Party with the Workers' Party. So the fact that George Galloway did it outside the duopoly inside Britain is all the more of an achievement, and it's all the more why Paul Mason's melting down.
So we look forward to George getting in Parliament, actually getting a platform to speak for us, to speak for so many people who have felt voiceless for so long. We don't have a voice in U.S. Congress like that.
Imagine that. Although we might, if Dennis Kucinich wins his bid as an independent in Ohio, he's a principled anti-war voice. He's running there, not with the Democratic Party, which he served in when he was in Congress. So there's one potential opportunity.
We'll see what's possible. George really has a gift for rhetoric. Watch one more of George responding to Rishi Sunak's crackdown on free speech. This is, just something to leave you with on Friday.
The Prime Minister is saying,
We're talking as if this is God. We're talking about little Rishi Sunak and the fag end of his prime minister. Don't talk to me as if he's come down from the mount with tablets of stone. The things that he says are somehow meant to awe me. They may awe you. They don't awe me.
A lot of people have just watched what the Prime Minister said. This is your opportunity to respond to what he said. Well, he says that there are forces here at home trying to tear us apart. He is implying you are a divisive figure. You have run an election campaign that has tried to appeal, particularly, not entirely, to one section of the community.
Who won the election? Me or Rishi Sunak? I've got the Democratic mandate here, not Rishi Sunak. He didn't even come second. He was lucky to come third.
True.
So don't put to me statements made by Rishi Sunak as if I'm supposed to be impressed by them. You don't impress me much.
This guy has spent some time today on the streets of Rochdale, and there are people who say that they feel intimidated by people like you and the people that have supported you.
I have just
and they have pointed out that you have concentrated your campaign on foreign affairs, and they worry that Rochdale will not be the winner.
That's my answer to you. I was just elected with a thumping majority by the electorate in Rochdale. That's all that matters to me.
So why are there people in the streets of Rochdale today worried?
Well, people voted yesterday, and they voted for me. Why is that difficult for you to grasp?
Why are there people on the streets worried?
There may be people who didn't vote for me who are worried, but the majority, the thumping majority, voted for me. I've got the mandate, and I'm going to the House of Commons with it.
And it's a mandate, you think, to do what? Because there are people that listen to what you say about whether or not Israel has a right to exist, what you say about what many Jewish people think are threatening
we had this
slogans.
Conversation last night. Why are you reheating it?
Because in the light of the Prime Minister's...
Don't keep telling me about the Prime Minister as if he was Moses.
Do you not respect the Prime Minister?
Do I respect the Prime Minister? I despise the Prime Minister.
Oh, man. That was great. It's Guy Fawkes time. It's time.
You can see why people are melting down, because he doesn't play the game. He doesn't go through all the platitudes you're supposed to go to and pretend as if you respect abhorrent people. And he calls them out for who they are. And this reporter's question, yeah, of course, it's a democracy. Some people are not going to agree with a politician. Is George Galloway the first politician where some of his constituents don't agree with him? Yeah, I mean, that's what happens. But as George pointed out, he won a vast majority, and that is the result of the vote, and that's what should be respected.
What's also, he has grassroots appeal. He's a known figure in the British street, and he served in Parliament before. He has the Workers' Party reclaiming the working class identity from the Labour Party of Sir Keir Starmer, a complete concoction of the transatlantic elite with the charisma of a filing cabinet. George is highly charismatic, and so he's able to be a truly independent lawmaker and servant of his constituents. It's something we can't really have in the US. Now, if Dennis Kucinich were to somehow win as an independent, yes, that would be something real. Kucinich is known. He's known to the working class of Ohio. He was a mayor of Cleveland who fought the local power company, and the media smeared him, and he turned out to be right. He goes back decades in Ohio politics. So, maybe that's possible there. But right now, you only have members of both parties, and particularly with the Democratic Party. Even if you despise Joe Biden, you can't say it in public because they'll destroy you. Party leadership will destroy you. George is not responding to any party leadership, so he can just speak the truth. And that's sort of refreshing about a parliamentary system, as de-democratized as it's been in the UK. So that's why I think this is such a breakthrough. And, it's what we need right now.
Well, speaking of which, before we go, maybe we should say a few words just about another important vote, which was in Michigan, with over 100,000 people casting their vote for uncommitted, sending a message to Genocide Joe that he's not going to have their support for supporting the Israeli genocide. And there are now widespread reports that actually this is really worrying people inside the White House, because 100,000 votes is a lot of people. And in Michigan, that will certainly make the difference in against Trump, because this is, after all, a swing state, and margins come down really to very, very, very small amounts. Certainly a lot less than 100,000 people voting uncommitted.
Yeah, I gotta go in like 3 minutes, but this vote was organized, and I know you've covered it on Useful Idiots in more detail, but this vote was organized in 3 weeks. This was spontaneous, grassroots. It's one of the most remarkable political protests I've seen in a primary campaign that didn't involve a candidate. There is no candidate. It's that guy, Dean
Phillips.
Dean Phillips. I mean, what is that?
Yeah.
I actually interviewed him once in Congress, and I said, what do you think about the Trump administration coup in Venezuela with Juan Guaido? And he said, well, I'm going to wait for the briefing, the House Foreign Affairs briefing, before I form my opinion. So
AOC said the same thing, basically. She said, I'll defer to the party leadership on this, which meant supporting the coup. Yeah.
So, the population of Michigan knows better, particularly the Arab and Muslim population, where they have the highest number. They know better than to give away their vote to someone who's committing genocide, in many cases killing members of their own family. But it's not just Arabs and Muslims. I know this. Anya, my wife, our colleague, she's from Michigan. Her family's from there. Members of her family voted uncommitted. They are not Arab or Muslim. And many people in Ann Arbor, where she's from, did. Joe Biden lost Dearborn by like 80% to uncommitted this time, though. He received over 80% of the vote in Dearborn in 2020 and 4% this time. So this sends a clear message, and it's a message that the White House is not acknowledging. Have they said anything about this? Issued any statements?
No, and in fact, there's an article out, I think, in the Washington Post today about how the White House is working now to insulate Biden from any pro-Palestinian anti-genocide protests, like trying to limit his appearances now so that he won't come across people calling him out for supporting the genocide, as he did recently in Virginia, where he gave a speech and it was interrupted multiple times. So their only response really is to try to insulate him from further criticism.
Yeah. And interacting with people. Like, imagine Biden's face-to-face with a Palestinian who has lost family in Gaza. Just it wouldn't be good. And he'd probably shout at them and blame Hamas for the deaths or something, as he's done with many other people. So this lack of response and lack of acknowledgement shows how little Biden and the Biden administration and the Democratic Party establishment cares about their own constituents, and about winning this key swing state. Who does Biden care about? He cares about Haim Saban and Casey Wasserman, Hollywood moguls who hosted a $250,000 a head fundraiser for Joe Biden earlier this month in Beverly Hills at the home of Haim Saban, who said, I'm a one-issue guy and my issue is Israel. These are ultra-Zionist mafia dons who are top donors to the Democratic Party. And that's who Biden is answering to. Biden raised a record $42 million in January. He's raising huge amounts of money because he's actually effectively catering to the donor class, the 1% who largely support genocide in Palestine. And that's who he's going to continue catering to all the way to November. So this protest in Michigan, it's going to go to Chicago. And Biden, he's not going to respond. So what do you do next? What do you do? People have to start exiting the Democratic Party and looking at third-party candidates like Jill Stein, who is urging voters to sign a no genocide pledge. I would put it to a lot of liberals I know. What if Joe Biden declared, as he has sort of said over the years, that he opposes abortion, that he would support the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision and take away a woman's right to choose whether or not to have an abortion? He said at points that he's, not pro-choice, but he goes along with the party line very strongly. And he's obviously not in control anymore anyway. But what if he did that? What if the Biden administration said, we're anti-abortion now? They would not vote for him. Most liberals, especially liberal women, the kind who came out in huge numbers to protest the Dobbs decision, it would be the protest we saw in Michigan. It would be like that on steroids in every primary state. So some of us have a red line with genocide and with apartheid Israel as well. And so we're drawing the red line. And they're going to have to pay the price for that. And the Democrats have to know at a certain point, they're going to have to change their policy on Israel, which is that aid to Israel must end and Israel must be sanctioned, or they don't receive our votes. It's the only way to get it done.
All right. Well, should we wrap it there?
Yeah. Well, let's wrap it there, and we'll be back next week. But thank you all for all your support and congratulations. It means a lot to me. I mean, it's what keeps driving us here. So can't express my gratitude strongly enough to this audience and to everyone who's helped us get here. So like this stream, support us however you want.
In honor of Max's Pierre Spray Award, support the Grayzone, like the stream, and come join us next time. We'll be back here whenever we do this again, which is usually we try to do here on Fridays, but sometimes we get thrown off schedule wise, but we'll be back soon.
Peace. Oh, Saturday, New York, DC, huge protests.
Yes.
The DC protest is at the site of Aaron Bushnell's last moments, the Israeli embassy. I'll be there.
And New York is at Washington Square Park, and I'll be there too.
Great.
At 1 o'clock.
Peace, everybody.
Peace, everybody.